Hi, my name is Ray. Welcome back to another episode of Ray's Economics Club. Today, we're going on our 6th episode of the ADS model unit. We're talking about government fiscal policies coming directly, usually from a central government. Now, the first, most traditional and most fundamental, perhaps, government fiscal policy during an economy is an automatic stabilizer. Now, to explain what it is, let's first look at this graph. This graph we see is similar to an ADAS model, except the AD curve now is our unemployment compensation and income transfer payments curve. It documents the level of government transfers during different levels of real GDP. And our supply curve is now replaced with a tax revenue curve. It documents government tax revenue collections during different levels of real GDP as well, production. Now you see here during low levels of real GDP, when real GDP when we are in a recessionary gap, when we're producing a Y2 instead of the optimal or long run equilibrium at YF, then during this recessionary gap, we see the unemployment compensation and income transfer payments increase. Now, the reason for this is because as we are in recession, unemployment increases and the typically average income or median income within households fall. Now, as more unemployed people exist, more people are receiving unemployment compensation. And as more people's income is typically decreasing, of course, we see more just government transfers in general that help aid lower income individuals, as lower income individuals and unemployed individuals increase in number. Now, secondly, we see during recessionary gaps, we see tax revenues decrease. Tax revenues decrease because many tax brackets, especially income tax, are progressive taxes, which means that they increase as your income increases, marginally speaking. Now, as a result, since median household income typically decreases during recessionary times, therefore more people are on the lower spectrum of the tax bracket. Therefore, tax revenue collection is lower percentage-wise, as for instance, percentage of income is lower collected in taxes because income is lower in general. And so as a result, we see less tax collection, more government transfers. As a result, we see a budget deficit. However, this budget deficit serves a purpose. It serves a purpose of increasing consumption during times when consumption may be lower. Because as we see more government spending and transfers, we see that this of course provides more funds to households for consumption. And we see less taxation on households, which also leaves them with more funds left over, proportionally speaking, for consumption. So we partially push our recessionary gap production back towards our long-run equilibrium. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we have an inflationary gap when real GDP is higher than a long-run equilibrium output. Now, currently, of course, as of 2019, January 2019, we are also in an inflationary gap as of the moment. However, so when this happens, we basically see the opposite happen. Tax revenues increase because household median income typically increases. So we see, proportionally speaking, since we have a progressive tax bracket, it increases. And of course, unemployment compensation and income transfers decrease because less unemployed people exist. More people, resources and labor are more fully employed. And so as a result, we see a budget surplus because tax revenue increase is above government spending. And we see the opposite happen. We see basically, as consumption decreases due to less government spending and more government taxation, we see basically push back towards a long-run equilibrium, although not completely. So that's basically an automatic stabilizer, basically without any direct marginal government action, just based off the current government structure of policies. Basically, no matter what happens, the government automatically comes in and basically fixes the economy to a certain extent, but not completely. So basically, one example of this is, for instance, during 2008, the Great Recession, we see basically as aggregate demand shifts downwards towards AD1 from AD0, we see a large shift downwards, right? However, during this time, basically we see the government runs a budget deficit. And from this budget deficit, just immediate automatic stabilizers, they do not completely push AD1 back towards the long-run equilibrium. However, they do partially, basically immediately almost, push AD1 towards AD1A, which is closer to AD0 or a long-run equilibrium than it was before. And this is without any more marginal or direct government interaction. This is automatic, basically. This is just based off of government structure. However, the government basically afterwards the government can either continue with more expansionary fiscal policy through either government spending or tax decreases basically on households or just for anyone in general. And so the government spending and tax decreases have different effects on the economy. Government spending, when the government spends money directly in the economy, the GDP changes according to the change in government policy, government spending, over 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. Basically, that this denominator says the marginal propensity to save. And so the multiplier is basically 1 over MPS. The reason for this is because we see a geometric sequence occur. The geometric sequence basically is this. So let's say the government spends about $10 billion directly in the economy. So they say 10 billion. So we see a $10 billion increase in the economy immediately. However, following that 10 billion injection in the economy, households or just anyone who receives 10 billion, they will first save according to their own NPS or the general NPS within the economy, let's say 10%. And so they'll spend the other 90% of the money they get immediately. And so, well, not immediately, but eventually. And so eventually we see another 9 billion spending afterwards, another wave of $9 billion of spending. And from that $9 billion spent, we see another 10% of that $9 billion spent saved from the people who received that spending, and we see another 9% of that $9 billion spent again. We see $8.1 billion spending. And so on and so forth. This is a geometric sequence, just basic mathematics. And so basically, according to the geometric sequence series formula, we see this as our overall change in real GDP. Now, the tax decreases. Let's say we decrease taxation. Let's see, we decrease tax to the point where our tax revenue decreases by 10 billion as well. This is similar. It had a similar effect to government spending. However, it's lower by a certain amount. Government spending, a change in real GDP changes by a negative change in taxation times our MPC over 1 minus MPC or our MPS. So our multiplier is basically negative MPC times MPS. It's negative because we're decreasing our tax revenues in an expansionary policy, of course. Now, what happens is this. Let's say governments decrease taxing the households by $10 billion. This is not a direct injection of $10 billion in the economy. Households just have $10 billion more left over in their own, let's say, income or revenue. And so, from this $10 billion, they will not spend all of it immediately. They will save 10% of it. And so, our immediate injection to the economy is $9 billion, which is 90% of our tax decrease. And so from this 9 billion, again, we see 8.1 billion furthermore in the second wave, and so on and so forth in another geometric sequence. But the difference is this is a decrease of 10 billion from our original government spending. We basically decrease our principal. We basically decrease by the amount of our principal if we were doing government spending instead of tax decreases. And so in the long run, it's not much of a decrease from government spending, but it's still a noticeable decrease from the impact government spending has on the economy. So one interesting side note to mention is that if we were to have a balanced budget, meaning if we were to increase government spending by 10 billion, we will also have to increase tax revenue by 10 billion because we need a balanced budget. Then our multiplier for our government spending would be equal to 1. This is because we basically have we subtract the two geometric sequences together, and we subtract the two geometric sequences, we result in only our principal government spending left over. And so our change in real GDP in this situation is just $10 billion and no more multiplication. So for our final clues, basically traditional government programs are typically on their foundation GDP stabilizers because they act immediately, basically almost as little lag time as possible. And so, but government spending at the end of the day, as an expansionary, further direct government measure, it has more effect on real GDP than change in taxation because of its direct, immediate injection of spending and consumption on aggregate demand. So it has a larger multiplier as MPC is less than 1. So that's all for today, and thank you. See you next time. Bye-bye.